Warhammer 40,000 Darktide has been out for a little over a month now, and it has had a pretty rocky launch. From poor stability, performance issues, and a number of crashes that have plagued early adopters, you might be wondering to yourself, how is the game now? In this video, I want to help answer that by going through a number of subjects and breaking them all down. I'll open up each section by giving a rating out of 10 of what the game was like at launch compared to the many improvements made up to this point. You can quickly navigate to any part of the video that interests you the most by using the chapters in both the timeline and the description. Now, this is your first time on my channel. I like to kind of upfront the knowledge of my videos as best I can so that you can stick around for the details if you'd like to. So, if you've not yet picked up Darktide, I think that this is a great time to do so. Sure, the game is absolutely missing more subclasses. It could use more maps and mission variety, but if you're looking, or if you're leveling a character to level 30 for the first time, this is a great time to jump in. You're looking at 20 or so hours per character to get to max level. With the game in a far more stable state and a massive increase to FPS compared to launch, you'll have fun on the march to 30 without being interrupted by a lot of annoying things like crashes or FPS tanks, leading to frustrating deaths. Now, there seems to be a rollout of content planned for January and February, so this gives you a chance to get up to the top before that content comes in whatever form that might be. So that's kind of like my high-level review of the game in a nutshell. If you haven't played it, it's going to be great. It's going to be a great, good goddamn time. If you have and were bored of the gameplay loop, wait until you see what comes out in the next month or so. It's worth noting, though, at the creation of this video, Steam and Game Pass versions of the game cannot cross-play. So please be mindful of that. If you have friends on Steam and just wanted to pick it up on Game Pass, you guys will not be able to play together. And another little kind of caveat here is that I very much love playing Darktide. I really, really enjoy the game. So that does create a little bit of a bias for me coming into this review, and I wanted to be upfront about that I've been playing the shit out of it on the channel. I stream it on all sorts of platforms, so just know that I really enjoyed the game coming into this review, but I'm going to try to be as fair about everything as I can. So, also don't forget to follow me on Twitch as I stream Darktide every Tuesday, Thursday, and Saturday every week. And we do community matches, giveaways, and I ramble about dumb stuff. But lastly, if you end up enjoying the video or if you're heading out, please don't forget to like, comment, and or subscribe. Each one of those helps out any content creator you watch in a huge way, while also funding my mini Aussie's unending treat addiction. Let's get started on Darktide's post-launch review. So to get us started off, let's talk real quickly about what Darktide is on a high level for, again, those people who are maybe jumping into this review without any preconceived notion of what Warhammer 40k Darktide is. So, if you've never played Vermintide 1 and 2, you're probably familiar with the Left 4 Dead series. Essentially, Vermintide 1, 2, and Darktide, all made by Fat Shark, are games where you are going to be playing as one of 4 characters, or in this case, one of 4 characters. Your Zealot Preacher, your Veteran Guardsman, your Psyker Psychonetic, and then your Ogryn Skullbreaker. And then these 4 characters will go through separate missions, wherein they'll encounter a horde of enemies. Your goal is to basically slay your way to the objective, complete the objective, and extract out. During that time, though, you will encounter a number of special enemies, again, very similar to Left 4 Dead, where you have things like the Demon Host, which mimic the Witch, and you'll have big raging mutants that'll charge at you and throw you, dogs that'll lock you down and start eating your face. You've got trappers that they'll trap you and put you in a trap house and make you start selling drugs. But also you'll have big, huge Ogryn characters, which are these massive beasts. Well, they're like humanoid creatures, not beasts, really. But all these things will kind of color your gameplay in Darktide. And outside of this, you'll earn levels from level 1 to level 30, and you'll choose feats every 5 levels that will then kind of custom build out the character you've got in a sort of semi-RPG light system. You also have a number of melee and ranged weapons that you'll take advantage of, using those depending upon which class that will really kind of flavor them. For example, the Veteran Guardsman is your kind of typical Call of Duty bro, to really kind of put it in the most layman's terms possible. You are very good at range combat. That's the kind of focus of all of your feats and all of your characters' kind of benefits, as well as your activatable. Every single character has a special activatable, or a kind of ultimate, if you want to think of it from an Overwatch standpoint. Say, for example, the Zealot Preacher has the ability to charge forthright into combat and then get a huge boost to their critical chance, as well as giving themselves 50% of their toughness back, which is a type of health. You also have your Psyker, which is basically a space wizard, if you want to think of it that way. They can burst the brains of anything that it kind of focuses on. And your Ogryn is essentially the proverbial meat shield, absorbing as much damage as they can and charging forth to raise any of your allies that are knocked down, or just push things out of the way to kind of make some room so that you can get out of a tight bind. So that's the game, just kind of, again, on a high level. I did want to kind of break that down because I felt like otherwise this video would be just kind of catered to people that already knew what Darktide was, have already played it, or whatever kind of shenanigans I'm trying to pull right now. So that is your kind of precursor to Darktide. Let's get into some of the nitty and gritty now. The first big subject I actually want to hit on is kind of the elephant in the room: performance and stability. The game at launch, I would have given this a 4 out of 10. You were looking to crash every single mission at least once. You were definitely going to have to suffer through a ton of FPS issues. You can take a look at my computer specs in the description below. If I was streaming and or recording, I would be looking at a frames per second hovering somewhere in the 60 to 80 range, depending upon what was going on the screen, how many enemies there were, what difficulty, because that does scale with the amount of enemies, all those things. And I mean, with the kind of machine I have, I would definitely not expect that kind of frames per second. That's very poor optimization for a game that had launched. When it was in early access and the early access beta, it was excusable, but at launch it felt a little rough. Now, I would say that this is an 8 or 9 out of 10, depending upon what your experience has been with your GPU. My current GPU, my current graphic settings that I've kind of custom tailored out, I have a whole like video, I'll link in the upper right corner on how to get the most out of this. I've gotten far more stability. I almost never crash now. And I think one of the big things is they rolled a patch out about a week ago or so. And that patch reduced the amount of crashing relating to buffs that were given to characters that would get weapon speed. And since I mainly play a Zealot Preacher, they have feats and stuff like that that will give them bonuses to their weapon speed if they're using certain things and what have you. And I was probably not putting those two together, and probably that was a result of a lot of my crashes. But taking a look at the game now, you can see it looks pretty crispy here. We're floating around, and I've kept in the upper left-hand corner the Steam's FPS counter. We're looking at a good 100 frames per second right now, and this is just in the kind of opening lobby area. If we had more enemies here, we'd probably drop a little bit in my frames per second, and again, this is thrown off quite a bit because I am recording, so that does kind of cause a little bit of a FPS drop. But if I jump over to options as well and I go into video, Fat Shark has added a number of things that really help out. DLSS used to not be helpful at, where it is. DLSS used to not be helpful at all, even if you could turn it on. Now it actually does what it's supposed to do, drops your frames per second, and it helps out substantially. You used to pretty much you'd be like relegated to using this, and I don't have an AMD card, even though, well, you work on an NVIDIA card. But they've also added texture and mesh quality to help out a whole ton. Ambient occlusion and light quality have been optimized to now not just tank your FPS like they were before. I still keep stuff like volumetric fog and depth of field off. But what's nice too about this game is it does have a lot of post-processing stuff. So bloom, skin subsurface, motion blur, screen space reflections, lens quality, that's all post-processing, so it kind of happens after the graphics have been rendered, so it's not as intensive on your card. So the nice thing about those is you can get a little bit more visual fidelity out of things without actually putting a bunch more burden on your GPU. So those are some nice things to have, but Fat Shark has added a couple ways to kind of custom make your graphic settings a little bit more catered to better fit out your performance needs. So now again, I would say this is about an 8 or 9 out of 10, a much better and much more stable game. I rarely get crashes now, and if I do, it's so infrequent that I'm like, whatever, it's a crash. But before, it would be probably 1 or 2 times per mission that I would crash, and sometimes in the kind of tumult of it all between the server stabilities and stuff like that, you wouldn't be able to get back in. So leveling your character was extremely frustrating because you weren't able to actually complete a mission. That is not the case now. You'll be able to, take a screenshot randomly in the middle of your narration, but you'll also be able to complete missions handedly and be able to level your characters with great visual fidelity and without crashing as much. Moving on to the subject of content, there's a lot going for the game, but not a ton right now, and that's just being transparent. From the launch of the game up to this point, we've had a new map added in, as well as some additional modifiers, such as this one right here, a little dog head, and 2 new weapons. That's nice for it having been a month of launch, and we've gotten that stuff added in. I like that that's there, and it's all for free. It just came in with the patch. But I will say that the mission variety and the map variety is quite low, and it's also very limited. If you're coming to this game from Vermintide, you're very used to queuing up a specific mission on a specific difficulty at your whim. In Darktide, you have this number of missions kind of available to you, and you'll see this little guy's about to, in 1 minute and 5 seconds, this is going to kick over, and a new mission will replace it on a random difficulty with a random primary objective, a random map with a random mission. Every single map has a different set of missions too, so it's kind of a very convoluted system. It's not that kind of narrative-driven system of Vermintide where things were on, for all intents and purposes, a very linear scale. I knew I had this set of missions, or this campaign brought this set of missions, and I could just go do them and queue them up on any difficulty. Furthermore, you had your secondary objectives like recover scriptures and grimoires in Vermintide, which were additional objectives you could just complete. Completing them gave you a higher chance of getting better items at the end of the mission. It is not like that here in Darktide. Scriptures and grimoires, scriptures and grimoires are a secondary objective, and they'll only spawn on the map if you load into a mission that has them as part of their secondary objective. And they only give you additional experience and additional money. That's it, which is nice, but at the current point of the game, there's no real reason to do it outside of doing your weeklies. You have a weekly set of missions that you'll get after level 12 that you can chase down, and you can re-roll some of those objectives, like say, hey, recover 12 scriptures or 12 grimoires, which is very cumbersome to do. You can re-roll it out. So grimoires and scriptures, which used to be a linchpin of the Vermintide series, are not so important in Darktide. And even when you load into the map and you have these secondary objectives, they do not spawn in set locations. There are set spawn points that it randomly will fill, but they might be there, they might not. You also have these modifiers on every single mission. This one says low intensity, so you'll deal with less hordes. This one's high intensity. Well, it's the opposite of low intensity. You also have hunting grounds where you deal with more packs of hounds. So there is a lot of opportunity for really cool, really dense, really fun content in Darktide, but I think right now it's kind of being held back by this unnecessary RNG and random number generator, but the randomness of these missions, of these difficulties, of these secondary and primary objectives makes it very hard to level up succinctly, to chase down specific penances that are basically additional kind of challenges you can do to unlock certain cosmetics in the game. It makes it very tedious for the player to do. And you kind of look at these, and if you're brand new to the game, you go, well, this has gone in 3 minutes and 20 seconds. Should I do this right now? Is this really important? Do I need to do strikes? Do I need to do Smelter Complex, HL 1736? And that's another thing. It's so convoluted in the name. It's not just the Smelter Complex. Cool, got it. I always know the Smelter Complex. We're doing the Smelter Complex. No, every single thing has got like a whole bunch of additional titles and names and stuff like that, and I understand that from a continuity standpoint when it comes to the lore of 40K, but as far as the UX for any of the people that are playing Darktide, I think it kind of adds an unnecessary level of complexity, especially if they're coming to Darktide without much knowledge of the 40K universe. So I think that this just being Spireside with the Hourglass would be make way more sense, because that's another portion of this, which is even more. So you see these two locations? Relay Station is the same, is a different map on Hourglass, I guess you could say maybe a different mission on the map Hourglass. So that is a little bit of convoluted nonsense that I really am not a huge fan of. And also, when Darktide came out, or at its launch currently, we have 4 archetypes or 4 main classes, and those would be your Veteran, your Psyker, your Zealot, and then your Ogryn, and 4 subclasses, which are the ones that we're all playing right now. When Vermintide came out, we had 5 archetypes with 3 subclasses each. So Vermintide 2, sorry. So that kind of leaves a lot to be desired when it comes to subclasses, because they deliver a ton of complexity to the game. Well, not even complexity so much as just different ways of approaching the character. So right now I can only play a Zealot Preacher, which means I'm only locked into this gameplay style, and across 4 separate characters, I only get those individual playstyles per character. So they've said as of a blog post in October that they plan to roll out one new subclass. So not Zealot, it'd be Zealot, whatever the hell they want to make the next subclass. Let's just call it Crusader, Zealot Crusader, every quarter. So that is great to hear, but I'm still waiting to kind of see how that looks. A lot of people have really been asking about a 5th archetype to kind of match in with Vermintide's 5 separate classes. So those kind of things do hinder the content portion of the game quite a bit. I personally, even though I know that the map density is very low and the mission density is very low and the subclass density is very low, I've still very much enjoyed what I've had because I just kind of queue up. I don't really think about it as much. Even though we have your 5 separate difficulties, I pretty much just click it to the hardest and press play game, and that's very fun for me. You can now do a private game as of the patch of last week. This allows you to then play with just your friends, which you could not do at launch, which is quite nice. And they said they're going to be adding in solo play with bots. That cannot be good because bots right now are currently terrible and you cannot do any secondary objectives. So that is kind of an issue that hopefully they'll be dealing with once they introduce that private solo play. But content right now, I'd be giving a 7 out of 10 because I still enjoy the gameplay loop, but I think that anyone else that is really chasing for very specific Vermintide 2-esque similar content is going to get bored quickly, or they're going to actually burn through all the 4 of the classes and go, well, where are the next ones? So I definitely give this a 7 out of 10 because it definitely is in need of a lot of help. And I think that once it does get a little bit of help, it will really, really push the game forward. So on that subject of content, we talk about now the gameplay and the gameplay loop. And I've talked about how the map selection is kind of stale and the mission selection is kind of stale, and that you can jump through them very quickly and have completed everything and be like, well, okay, I guess we're just going to go through the same ones. And the same thing could be said too about those modifiers, those secondary objectives. I get it. It's all there. But for me, the gameplay loop is a 9 out of 10 because no matter, even though I'm experiencing these same missions over and over and over and over, it doesn't necessarily get very boring for me because the way that I'm going about them is just so different. In addition to that too, the fact that the classes aren't locked. So example, in Vermintide 1 and 2, if I were to play one character, no one else can play that character when I do that mission. But this time around, I can have 4 veterans, I can have 4 ogrins, I can have 2 ogrins and 2 zealots, or one of each. It doesn't really matter. And that creates so much different diversity in the gameplay each time you're encountering all these different fun things. Maybe you're jumping through with a zealot and they've got a flamer and they're just purging their way to victory. Or you've got an ogrin with a slab shield who's able to just take shots on that shield as you slowly advance. Or you've got a veteran with 2 plasma guns, or a plasma gun and a bolter, and they're just ripping down field, or a psyker with its ability to just brain burst things, or its surge staff shooting lightning everywhere. It creates this fun bit of chaos across the entire gameplay. And I love it so much because of the randomness of the specials that you're going to interact with. Where those enemies spawn means that you could jump into the beginning of a mission and it's going to be a torrid, horrible hail of gunfire that kills you in the first 2 minutes and you get pissed off. Or you jump back in and there's just nothing there, and that first portion's a little bit more calm. I think that's what keeps this limited amount of maps and missions very fun for me, because everything is just so different and so diverse, and it goes from being pretty mild to extremely tense. And it's really that fun moment of trying to get to the extraction point, and you're all in that extraction point, and you end the mission, you're like, oh man, we just barely made it. We limped to the end of that. And I think that there's so much to be said about playing with some friends, because again, this is probably one of the better co-op games out there, especially, right? If you have a whole crew of people to jump in this with, 4 people just kind of rip through it, it becomes so fun. And I have a whole server of people that I've jumped through, and we kind of alternate in and out, and that makes it very fresh and exciting. We can bounce ideas off of each other. And I think without that, yeah, it can be kind of a frustrating little bit. But I still think that with what you have available to you, even playing with just the public user groups, or pickup groups as it's called, pugs, you just still have a lot of fun. People are now a little bit more versed in the game, that jumping into the higher difficulties with randoms is still pretty enjoyable because people somewhat know their roles. Now, don't expect it to be flawless, but still, you can find a pretty cool person that you're playing with, join his strike force together, or you guys can join strike forces together, and boom, bam, you've got someone that you can play the game with. And I think that the gameplay's randomness and hecticness and coming across monstrosities that throw you around, or maybe blowing up a barrel that ledges you and sends you over the into a precipice, is one of the most enjoyable things about this game. Is that random chaos that unfolds through every single mission. Even though you've played that mission 100 times, it still has a little bit of a snowflake every time you come into it that I just really, really, really enjoy. And again, layering in the atmosphere and sound, which we're about to talk about, makes the game just such an enjoyable experience from start to finish for me. And it's why I'm giving that gameplay loop a 9 out of 10. Can it be better? Absolutely. Will it get better? For sure, because we've seen it in Vermintide 1 and 2. But I definitely think at its beginning, like when the game launched, and now, it's still that same style of gameplay loop, and I'm still enjoying it from the launch of the game, even the early access beta for the pre-orders, up to now, just as much as I was when it first came out. Now, on the subject of atmosphere and sound, it's a 10 out of 10. It's easily a 10 out of 10. The music is amazing. The OST just slap-a-doodle-doos. It's so goddamn good. And the way the atmosphere is set up, it just hits every note. As a longtime Warhammer 40k fan and nerd, it's everything I ever read about the way that underhives and hive cities and how they're all constructed and how it's built upon each other and how everything doesn't make sense from a geometric standpoint and everything like that. It's all so well done. And you just kind of look around, even just the lobby area, the Morningstar, is great. You have a little Vox announcer that kicks in every so often. When you go to the training room, you have the Vox announcer that talks just random little screeds of like praise to the Emperor and stuff like that. Like, it just kind of fits into the world. You understand how dogmatic the Imperial Creed is by these Vox announcers, by seeing things on the walls, by hearing stuff in the training room, all these little things, and the massive overblown statues, the huge projections of saints and stuff like that. All of it fits so well into the environment and the story of Warhammer 40,000. And I think that, and this is, again, personal opinion here, there has never been a game as good as this at portraying just the normal kind of hive city life of a Warhammer 40k citizen. Sure, yeah, you're part of an inquisitorial retinue and there's all sorts of cool, fun things attached to that. But just going through a hive city and seeing what the normal citizen has to deal with, albeit filled with tons of Nurgle-infested zombies and chaos-corrupted things, I mean, be that as it may, but just to kind of see it through that lens, rather than seeing it through the lens of like a space marine and battle brother and blow it up with everything you've got. Like, it's a much different scale and scope. It's not you in this big hulking suit of power armor. It's you as just a humble human or an Ogren. And for the most part, you are no one special. And I think that kind of sets the scale and the atmosphere of what you're dealing with when you start to encounter like demon hosts in a mission without any lights on it. It just freaks you out a little bit. And this isn't really a suspense horror game, right? You're not playing Outlast here. You're playing a Warhammer 40k game, and I think it pegs that, well, maybe it doesn't peg it, I think it really nails that really good, deep, rich atmosphere that you get just kind of playing and reading through and looking at any of the art from 40k or anything like that. It just kind of feels baroque and archaic, and all of the technological innovations. Like, it's the 42nd millennium, and we got fans. We got like normal ass rotary fans that looks like a gigantic fan that I would see in my computer. If I put LED lights on that damn thing, it'd be made by Corsair. So it's like that kind of weird steampunk sci-fi style look to all the technology is dripping with every single inch of this game that I just really, really love. And like I said, it hits into that exact imagery of what I expect from Warhammer 40k. So now, having talked about the gameplay loop, the current amount of content in the game, the big question is, what is gear progression and endgame content like for Darktide? And as of the creation of this video, there really isn't any true endgame. You get to the max level, and it's really a kind of a game of RNG from there. And that's probably the biggest pain point for a lot of current players, is that most of the game just feels random as soon as you get to the max level. If we compare this to games like Vermintide 1 and 2, every time you completed a mission, you had a chest that would drop. And that chest's rarity, or basically increased chance of better weapons and item drops, increased with things that you did throughout that mission. Completing side objectives, doing the grimoires, and doing the the tomes, all these little things would result in a much better drop. So you were able to progressively get better items as you raised both your kind of item level, or kind of think of it as Destiny's light level if you want to think of it from a game outside of the Tide series. And you'd get better and better drops as you went through things. That's not the way it works here, unfortunately. It's actually extremely random. So really it kind of comes down to you trying to get a weapon you like, hoping you find a good enough solid roll, and I'll explain that in a little bit, and then hopefully getting the blessings that you want. Because as of right now, all of the crafting, and again, we'll get into that too in a little bit more, is not in the game. So you have to hope you get the right blessings on the weapons that you want. Take, for example, this combat blade. It's a pretty good combat blade because it has these 2 blessings that I really want for a very specific build I have in mind. Again, this crusher here, it's got 2 really nice blessings, and I just lucked out on getting them. There is no real way to guarantee that you get a good weapon, which was kind of the big selling point for Darktide at the beginning. My dog is just going to town on one of his squeaky toys. It's a little Wookiee. But these things kind of result in a very frustrating style of gameplay that kind of, again, really relies on too much RNG. So let me show you how this kind of works itself out. So the only way to get weapons outside of the random chance of them dropping at the end of a mission, and the rarity and the roll of those being completely random as well, is the armory exchange. We go here to requisition weapons and curios, and you'll see at the bottom a timer, 33 minutes. So every hour, the entire stock here resets. You might get a weapon that you want, you might not. You have no way of controlling what happens here. And that's the biggest thing, that some people have not had a weapon drop for them that they've wanted since they've created their character, or they've had just nothing but garbage weapons drop for their character. And you might be thinking that, hey, like any other action RPG or any RPG with a loot system, I have to just find a really good blue item and that's no big deal. No, actually, you can have here's a really good example, a gray item drop that actually rolls very well. And here's what I mean by roll. So every single item has this modifiers category, and the max percentage that can roll here is 80%. And this all combines to this number right here, 380. This, for all intents and purposes, is a very strong roll for this specific item. Now, conversely, let's go to one of these blues. 325. This means that this doesn't have max rolls in all these categories, so it's actually not that great of a weapon by comparison. Even if I were to boost it using the crafting system, which I'll show off in a little bit, it's not going to improve any of these modifier amounts. So I might have a really bomb-ass sword. Let me get one with a really low. Real bomb-ass sword that has good first target, cleave, defenses, and cleave targets, but it has super low damage. So it's actually not going to do a lot of raw damage. And that is a big thing that hinders you from getting the weapons that you want. You might get all the good rolls you want, but not good damage, or you might get good damage and none of the other good rolls that you want. So this creates a lot of chaotic RNG that is only based off of every hour this resets, and you just hope to God you get an item that you really want. Now, it is nice that it's just simply based off of the currency in the game. You just simply go and do missions and you'll get this currency, so that's kind of a nice little thing. But it still is a very tedious thing. For a lot of people, they just simply sit in game and wait every hour for this to reset, and then they check the stock. I jump on here and there and I see what I see, and you don't really need to min-max this, but if you're trying to quote-unquote push endgame whenever it actually occurs, you're going to want the best of the best, because the Vermintide 1 and 2, you always wanted the best of the best, because the game gets exponentially more and more challenging as you get into the really, really hard stuff. So they have added a lot of really cool ways to get more granularity on this stuff. Like, hey, I now know what cleave targets does exactly by hovering over these things. And that is something that we did not have in the early access beta for people who pre-ordered. Launch brought us this. So that's actually very nice. But there is still some complexity attached to this. If I look at this blessing, this gives me some nice stuff here. Okay, that's pretty cool. This one gives me cleave on hit. Okay, pretty self-explanatory. But let's kind of look at some of these other ones. Where is one that I'm particularly looking for? Because a lot of those are pretty self-explanatory. I'll jump into one of the ones in my own character here. So this says 20% impact. Well, let's go ahead and press V. Wait, I can't hover over these to find out what impact is? What the fuck's impact? So those kind of things are going to be very confusing for you. I've gotten a number of videos I've done on them, but it shouldn't take me doing a video on the data mining efforts of the community to find out what impact is. So those kind of things do create a lot of complexity, and it makes gear progression and endgame stuff a lot more difficult. So let's go now over to the crafting station, and this is kind of another hornet's nest in and of itself, but as of the inception of the crafting system with the early access beta, we got, I think, nothing. I think Consecrate was the only thing we could do. And you can consecrate a gray weapon and increase its, effectively, its item rating. Now, this adds a perk to it. Your weapons can have 2 perks and 2 blessings. So I can consecrate this and make it a green weapon, but it does not increase any of these values, which is kind of frustrating. So if I bring this thing from a gray all the way up to an orange, this stuff never changes. It just simply gets perks and blessings added on. And so now I get 20% damage to infested enemies. Well, what's this do if I added a blessing to it? Okay, now that's random. That thrust there, I don't know if I'm going to get a good blessing or not. With that being said, we will eventually have the opportunity to re-bless things or earn a blessing. And I'm not sure what either of those really do and how they do them. As of the last patch, we can now refine items, and I can say, let's go to a weapon I'm not going to refine because I'll explain that in a little bit here. Let's go to this one. Well, this is +1 stamina. Maybe I don't want that. I'm going to refine it. All right, well now it's 20% damage to unyielding enemies, and it costs less to do this. So that's kind of nice, but it locks the other perk, so I cannot customize that other perk. So it'll probably be the same thing for blessings. I'll be able to re-bless one of them and lock the opposite. So this doesn't really give us the full level of customization on a weapon that it was touted that we would get in the beginning portions of the game's development. And maybe that'll change once we get more into the crafting. But this does make that gear progression, again, very locked behind, very set variables that we have no control over. And it makes the end game more daunting because A, there's no real end game because 5 difficulty is the max you can go to. And there's no real end game kind of progression for that. There's no like, hey, go do stuff for this to progress these really cool end game penances, or these really cool end game items. Any of the red items that were part of the Tide series prior to this, which were like super rare, those don't really exist. So that's kind of a bit of transparency on probably the biggest pain point I see in the game. And I give this a 6 out of 10 because of that. Sure, there's a lot of really cool things I can do, but I cannot get the absolute min-max granularity that a lot of gamers really pursue. If you're more of a casual, just want to pick up something and play and smash things around, this is not going to be a big pain point for you because you're not going to care. You're going to pick up the item that you like the combo of, and that is just fine. There are plenty of ways to enjoy this game without having to min-max it. But I think, like I said, the majority of gamers are going to pursue that min-max route that they cannot hit right now in the current iteration of Darktide. Now, one subject I want to bring up in this review, and before we kind of get into my overall, like, hey, here's what I give the game, blah, 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 is the real money store, the Commodore's Vestures, what we spend money for to get the special in-game currency to then buy things in the game. When the game first came out, I would have given this a 5 out of 10. It was pretty crappy because you could not buy the proper amount of currency to buy a specific bundle. You either bought $2,100 or $4,500, so $10 or $20. Now we get an $11.50 one where we can just simply buy exactly what we want. So that's nice. That's a lot better of an improvement. Also, when the game first came out, these individual sets would have a timer below them, so you weren't sure if they were ever going to come back again. And that kind of created a little bit of FOMO. Now, the reality is that video games need this. If you're playing a game that has a kind of play as service style model where they're going to constantly be adding a lot of content to it, this is how they derive their development budget. And it's just kind of a necessary evil of the gaming industry now. So I'm not crapping on the fact that there is a real money store. Like I said, it exists. There exists in so many games. They're far more predatory in other games than this game. So I actually don't mind it. That gets me to my other point of I give this now an 8 out of 10. They've removed the timer here. They've given us transparency on how these items are going to swap. They said, hey, you know, we're going to have, I think it's 3 or 4 tabs These are the different tabs here for the veteran, and they give different offerings of items per tab. And they said that when we get to cycle one of those tabs out, we'll put a 24-hour timer on the tab that is the oldest, which would be this one, and it will be cycled out. So that's good to know. And they said also that it'll cycle back in again. It's just going to cycle out temporarily. So that's a nice fair bit of transparency, because that was a big pain point people had. Also, this is all purely cosmetic stuff. You don't need any of this to succeed in the game. This is not a buy to win type of real money store that a lot of these games have. There's no way to just simply level a character to 30 by spending the money. You have to kind of labor it through on your own. And to be totally fair, this is some really cool goddamn cosmetics. I think a lot of people have always wanted to play a Steel Legion character. When we have the Death Core of Krieg on here, it's going to be tits. It's going to just pop off. Everyone's going to love that one. I mean, I'm going to buy it. I almost bought this one because I wanted the helmet. The Steel Legion is one of my favorite looking Imperial Guard regiments. You have got this one right here, which is basically a Crusader, which is a really big one that people have wanted as a subclass for the Zealot. So you get a lot of very cool, very different options for your character that are purely cosmetic. You don't need to invest any money into this. I bought the Imperial Edition, so I got a free 2,400 points here to use on this, which is great. I bought this helmet for my Psyker, and he looks like a cool Sith Lord. I really dig it. So that's why I give this an 8, because it's really reduced a lot of its predatory tendencies. It's given us a lot more transparency. And again, like I said, it is a necessary evil of the gaming industry. So there's no reason for me to say, oh, they shouldn't have this store here. As long as this doesn't jump people ahead of the line, I really have no problem with the game doing it. So there is my kind of a review of the improved real money store, which was pretty bad to begin with. So with all this being said, we come to the summary of things. What is my overall review for Warhammer 40k Darktide? And if I were to take the values of everything we talked about, right? Performance and stability, the current content, the gameplay loop, the atmosphere and sound, the end game content and gear progression, as well as a real money store, we come to about an 8.5 out of 10. And I think that's a pretty fair value for the game in its current state. I think that there's plenty of gameplay that you can sink into this. I have over 100 hours, and I'm not bored. I'm not bored because I like the gameplay loop. It's very enjoyable to me, even though it is stale in the amount of missions and maps available to you, as well as additional modifiers onto those maps. I find the gear to be exciting, even though there is not a reliable way to get good gear. It's extremely gambly, and since I'm using the in-game's money, what do I care if it's gambling? I'm not losing my money. But I guess for me, that is still kind of a fun portion of it. I would much rather prefer being able to custom build out a weapon in the way that I want, and then I can test the crap out of it and see if I really want it. Or I can kit out 2 or 3 different versions of one weapon for different builds. I do want to get to that point with Darktide. In its current iteration, and understanding that Fat Shark has been very good about listening to the community's feedback and providing direct patches or hotfix to fix some, not all, of the issues that we've encountered. I'm really big on that. There are still some real big glaring ones, like a store recycle, which has been data mined. That's going to be hopefully coming, where you can just simply press a button and recycle the store. A lot of other things coming as far as additional subclasses, which have been data mined. All this stuff is kind of within the code. We've also seen some weapons on all of the trailers for all of the individual classes that are not in the game. An example would be an Ogren 2-handed weapon, a Psyker's 2-handed force sword, a 2-handed axe for the Hopeful Zealot, a bunch of multi-melta for the veteran sharpshooter. All these things have been leaked or pulled out of the code in some way, shape, or form throughout the many months of early access beta and the launch. So I'm very excited to see those things come into the game. So it does give me hope for a lot of really awesome things on the horizon. I really enjoy the game in its current iteration, and I think that now that the game is stable, the stuff that's lacking is okay if you're jumping into it for the first time, because you're going to spend so much time leveling your character up. Like I said, it takes around a solid 20 hours of gameplay just to get one character to 30. And you're probably going to want to get all the characters to 30 so that you have variety to play with your friends. And that's another big thing too, is this is probably, just like Vermintide 1 and 2, the best co-op game out there in the Warhammer universe. I think hands down for 40K, it's probably one of the best 40K games, along with like things like Space Marine 1, soon to be hopefully Space Marine 2, Dawn of War 1 and 2. I'm not going to talk about Dawn of War 3. Like, those games are up there in the kind of pinnacle Hall of Fame of Warhammer 40K games, and I think that is across atmosphere, the hopeful future gameplay loop and classes and options for classes in this game, it's going to be one of the craziest 40K games out there, and I enjoy every second of it. So go ahead and let me know what you're feeling about things in the comment section below. Are you really not enjoying the gameplay loop? And here's why. Or do you really find the endgame progression, or you really like the RNG portion of the gear is up your alley? Let it be known. Because if you're jumping into the game for the first time, don't just take my advice as some random YouTuber. I'm a guy who plays video games on my channel for a living. But I enjoy the shit out of Warhammer 40K, so I'm biased. I've already said that I really enjoy this game. Take a look at a lot of different viewpoints. Find those pain points that a lot of people have and see if they align with what you have for your expectations of a video game. If those pain points are bigger than the ones I brought up, then really just kind of listen to them. The game is on Game Pass right now, so you can jump into Game Pass, play the game for like $1 a month, whatever the hell it is. Just keep in mind, and if your friends on Steam, you cannot crossplay with them just yet. They haven't even talked about the option to future crossplay that I know about. So keep those things in mind too. And if you were looking forward to a console launch, all they've said is that it's coming in 2023. So that is, again, another big issue too, because Vermintide has a large console following that I at least have heard of. So all those things in mind, again, I give a 8 or 8.5 out of 10 here for Warhammer 40K Darktide. Absolutely love the game. Excited for its future. Does have some faults right now, but it's so much more stable, so much more enjoyable, so that you can really sink your teeth into a really good chunk of 40K gameplay. As always, guys, thank you so much for watching here today. I know by the time I put this video out, it should be coming around to Christmas time. So if you are celebrating Christmas, have a Merry Christmas. Otherwise, enjoy your holidays. If you're watching it after the fact, I hope you enjoyed your holidays or had a Merry Christmas. But thank you so much for watching here today, guys. Have a good one and take care.